The Dharma, incomparably profound and exquisite, is rarely met with, even in hundreds of thousands of millions of kalpas. We now can see it, hear it, accept and hold it. May we realize the true mind, the Tathagata. Today is day 4 already of this 7-day sesshin, the first of 2 in a row here at Mountain Gate in northern New Mexico in October, end of October 2021. And I'd like to address today the human condition, which is essentially that we live in cages. These cages are built of our own ideas, our own assumptions, our own conditioning. And what our practice is about seeing through the bars of those cages to the point where we are able to break free of them and live in the flow of life as opposed to pain and suffering. And let me share some of the words of Dzigo Kongtrul Rinpoche, a Tibetan Buddhist teacher, from the book, It's Up to You. And that is basically what it's about, really. It is up to each one of us to liberate ourselves, to melt the bars of these cages that we have built around ourselves. Many, many long years ago, a Dharma brother of mine, we were actually both ordained along with my Dharma sister, Mitra-roshi, in the same ceremony, became Buddhist priests in the same ceremony. And eventually all 3 of us became teachers as well. Denver Zen Center was where hold on a second, let me remember his name. I haven't thought of him in such a long time. Mitra-roshi taught, he's now retired. Vermont Zen Center, Casa Zen de Costa Rica, and the Toronto Zen Center until her Dharma successor, Taigen, took over. And myself with the beginning of Mountain Gate and also Hidden Valley Zen Center, from which, the latter of which I've retired from to devote the rest of my life to teaching from Mountain Gate. And Danon was actually a professional mime for his working years. He actually trained with Marcel Marceau. And at one point, Roshi Kapleau asked him to do a performance. And he did this wonderful, wonderful mime. He was a gifted mime of living in a cage, in a box, trying to find the edges. And that, as I said, is our human conditioning, but it's our human conditioning in operation. It's not our human condition in general. We're not caught in this. We don't have to stay stuck in it. And our Zen practice, I'm gonna sneeze. Excuse me. Our Zen practice offers us all the tools and the opportunities necessary to do this. The extended out breath is a phenomenal practice. It brings us right through the edges of that cage. Takes us a while to recognize it, but it's effective and powerful. The koans as well continue that process and amplify it and expand it. So here's, again, Dzigo Kongtrul Rinpoche. Society's preconditioned habits and traditions are strong within us. Yet this consensus about how to live, about what's good or bad, favorable or unfavorable for us, is simply the consensus of our conventional ancestors. It does not necessarily imply great wisdom. Certainly there is some conventional wisdom, but most of the time it tells us how to create, live in, and benefit from samsara, the world of suffering. Ignoring the fact that samsara itself is a big problem. Samsara, as you know, is the opposite of nirvana. And we can realize nirvana in this very life. Samsara is being caught in greed, anger, and delusion. Nirvana is becoming free of greed, anger, and delusion. It's sort of like we're stuck in a pot of glue and we're trying to extricate ourselves, but the glue keeps pulling us back. And the glue is society and the ideas of society that are very strong. Human beings are, it's felt, genetically programmed to need to be in groups, because in ancient times it was safe, much more safe than being alone. And this is why when somebody is shunned, it's such a powerful punishment. Because if you're shunned, if you're sent out of the group, in ancient times, it's your death. The group is needed to survive, to obtain food, just simply to survive. It took many people to pull down a mastodon. It took many people to fight off a saber-toothed tiger. It took many people to find the berries, the rare berries and fruits and edible vegetables and so on, that were the source of food before agriculture began to be practiced. And so the sticky glue in this great pot that we're stuck in is the glue of society. I didn't ever see the movie, The Matrix, but what I understand about it is that most of the population in that movie are caught in a kind of dream state, prisoners in a kind of a dream state. And there were a few people who were outside the matrix and free to move and function in ways that were not caught by that matrix. And that's, in a way, we who do Zen practice are those who are outside the matrix. We're choosing not to buy into 100% of society's ideas about what is valuable, what is essential, and what will make us happy. There was a movie years ago titled Lipstick. And while that was not, this was not the theme of the movie, that's the idea. This is what advertising is all about. If you buy the right clothes, if you buy the right lipstick, if you wear lipstick, if you have the right car, if you have the right job, if you live in the right section of town, and so on and so forth. There are so many subtle and not so subtle rules. And they're not really rules, really. They're assumptions about how one can be happy in life. And that's all it is artificial and eventually unfulfilling. There are stories, one of which is by a British man who was, I think he was a stock trader, and he had everything that was valued in his subculture. He had the flat in the best part of London. He had money to spend any way he wanted to, anytime he wanted to. He's rolling in it. He had a fancy car. I don't remember what it was, but it was one of the higher end, very rare cars. And he went to yet another party and walked out of the party because it felt hollow. His life was feeling hollow. And so he responded to an ad in a British newspaper for, quote, a week, restful week in a monastery, in a Zen monastery in Japan. And those of us who have been in Zen monasteries in Japan will laugh at that one, because at least the monastery I've been in, I'm not sure I would describe it as a restful week. Challenging week? Sure. Intense week? Sure. Rest? Where was that? The schedule, if you were lucky, you would get maybe 4 hours of sleep at night. Anyway, he went, and indeed it was the way a temple was surviving, was by offering these vacations to Britishers to do a certain amount of the schedule. And there actually are 2 sub-temples in the Myoshinji complex that are bed and breakfast temples these days. They were in previous centuries actual active teaching temples, but with a Meiji restoration, the support for Buddhist temples was pulled pretty severely. And there was a major negative, not exactly uprising, but to a certain degree it was, because temples were destroyed. And there was a movement against Buddhism in Japan. So some of the temples that did survive had to come up with unique ways to do so, since they were no longer supported as teaching temples. And so in the Myoshinji complex, which is a complex of 45 temples, only 4 of which are actually still teaching temples. There are 2 bed and breakfast temples. There's one formal garden temple that makes its money by charging entrance fees to its amazing Japanese garden and serving tea for an extra price. There are a couple of kindergarten temples or daycare temples, and so on and so forth. At any rate, our Zen practice offers us respite. It's not the kind of respite that this man was seeking when he answered the ad, but he did go, and he did have a week in a temple, and the off hours, of which there were a number, because it wasn't a real seriously teaching temple. It was probably one of those bed and breakfast temples. He would hear a shakuhachi, a bamboo flute being played in the temple garden. And he investigated that and listened and listened and listened and was entranced by it, and decided to go ahead and buy himself a bamboo flute and try it out. And he did, and actually was good enough at it that this man who was playing the flute in the garden, who happened to be a flute master, took him on as a student. And he stayed in Japan, or went back to Japan, I don't remember which. And so he did, he studied shakuhachi. Now, there is a little known Buddhist practice in Japan called Suizen, blowing Zen. And the monks, and they are monks who practice Suizen, have a unique outfit. They have this kind of a squarish basket over their head with a mouth hole and eye holes, so that they remain incognito. And their practice is to play shakuhachi a good part of the day. There are I think they do their own retreats where they spend weeks and months in the mountains simply blowing. In other words, making music through the shakuhachi, which is, interestingly enough, a form of susokan, because susokan, we are extending our out breath far out, which requires that we focus on the physical experience of that. And that focus requires that we let go of extraneous involvement, letting thoughts be. They begin to fade. We stay present enough that we hear, for example, the dog barking out there, who is Oslo, by the way, wanting to be inside here with us, but he's outside in this rather large kennel that we have, because he's not allowed to play with Boo, our wonderful big dog. They are great companions, but Oslo had an encounter with a truck that involves now a cone over his head and limited activity. In fact, we just got a reminder call from the vet that he's got an appointment on Monday for a follow-up for his surgeries, which means there won't be a Teisho on Monday because I will be taking him down. It's an hour drive down, a little more than an hour, because it's on the other side of Santa Fe to Gruta Veterinary Hospital. And I can say this, that Oslo has done marvelously. So extending the out breath, or doing the suizen, playing the shakuhachi, or playing the French horn. In fact, one of our members played the French horn from junior high school on through high school. And that set her up beautifully for becoming highly functioning in the Susokan and able to go into her Zen practice rather fast. Not only is it the focus on the experience of blowing, whether it's in Suizan or in Susokan or in playing a wind instrument, there's also an additional factor in the playing of an instrument of focus on specific procedures, paying attention to the music. It's very good practice. So any of you out there who's ever taken up a wind instrument or would like to, go for it. It can make a big difference in your Zen practice, actually. Well, the upshot of it is that this man from England decided, he learned about Suizen, and he decided to start practicing it. And so he found himself a place in the mountains, of which there are many in Japan, and for 6 hours every day for several weeks, simply played the shakuhachi, simply practiced his shakuhachi. And then he went back to his shakuhachi teacher, who was significantly impressed by his ability to play and his focus and his presence. And since then, he's made a career of playing shakuhachi, and I think teaching it as well. He's no longer living in Japan. Last I knew, he is living in Vancouver, Canada. But if you're interested in learning more about this, he's written a book called Blowing Zen. And I'd suggest that you go ahead and grab a copy and read it, because it's a fascinating book, for one thing. And he himself has had some fascinating experiences, including being asked to play for some event by the yakuza, the bad guys in Japan. And he was quite concerned about what his results would be. When I was living in Sogenji, on a free day, I ended up going to the Baskin Robbins, and yes, Baskin Robbins, and Kentucky Fried Chicken, and McDonald's, and Dunkin' Donuts are all over the place in Japan. And this Baskin Robbins store has these teeny tiny little milkshakes. And so I went to get a milkshake because I love milkshakes, chocolate ones. And normally I'd go in and there's a place to sit and drink your milkshake and so on. And I walked in and the air was thick with intensity. There was a young woman ordering. She appeared to be what the movies would call a gun moll. And there was an older man with dyed hair and probably in his 60s. She was probably in her early 30s. He was probably in his 60s, watching out the window as his underling was parking his car. And you could tell that if that underling got a single scratch on that vehicle, he would probably be executed. The yakuza are the mafia of Japan. And there were a few women with their small children sitting in stony, fearful silence along the wall. So I ordered my milkshakes and left. The milkshakes are so tiny in Japan that 2 of them are equivalent to a small milkshake in America at a Baskin Robbins. So he was not sure what would happen to him if he didn't play to the level that they wanted him to play at, and he had no idea what that would be. At any rate, I won't tell you the answer. Read the book. And let's continue with Dzigar Control Rinpoche. More about these cages that we build for ourselves. Moment to moment, thoughts and feelings arise. Every thought is based on a perception or belief. And most beliefs come from the consensus of others whose readings of the phenomenal world are not always accurate, not all that accurate, actually. And add to that the conditioning that we experience based on our interactions with the people that we are living near or with, who may or may not be traumatized. And when traumatized, are acting out of that trauma in defense and reactivity, and exerting trauma on us as well. And so we learn as well how to behave in certain circumstances. We learn beliefs, we develop beliefs about ourselves. We gradually build our cage. So I don't see too well, so it's hard to read here. There are many wrong tracks in society, but they are all basically the same. They all take us outside of ourselves to satisfy our inner needs, whether they take us toward material goods or toward social relationships and emotional codependence. They all ignore mind's own potential to provide us with happiness and peace. Our own potential to provide us with happiness and peace. Unlike the cavemen, the great sages of the past sought and found independence from the preconditioned habits and traditions of society. They revolted against the great human tragedy of ignorant ego mind and found the strength to harvest peace through looking directly at the mind. And again, that is what our Zen practice is about, looking directly at the mind. We're accustomed, having built this cage, to avoid looking at the mind, but living in this, within the walls of this myth that we've grown up in. This is not to demean that myth or discount it. Our growing up conditions us. And for those of us who have experienced trauma, it's vital to work with someone who is effective and experienced in helping people free themselves from the residue of trauma. But for anyone with simple levels of a challenging life, Zen practice alone will make a big difference. And of course, what we practice here, the Sosokan, the koans, is a vital and proven result maker. Right now, we are in the first of this 2 in a row sesshin, which is going to give everyone here a really good shot in the arm in deepening practice. But as the book said, it's up to you. And that's the hard part. We are deeply invested in those cages. They're built for a reason. They're built to keep us safe. If we live within the walls of those cages, then we think, at least, they won't cause us harm, and that we will find pleasure and freedom from pain. But the fact of the cage's existence themselves indicates that we are going to experience pain, discomfort, suffering, along, of course, with here and there, hopefully, some joy and freedom and some happiness. But far better to turn inward and explore this mind and see where we're caught in ideas and conditioning. And as we go deeper and deeper, exploring beyond words in our practice, we begin to free ourselves from that conditioning. We begin to see through this self-image, this ego self that drives our reactions, that has built the walls of the cage. So, on this 4th day, we've already gained some deep momentum into this process of freeing ourselves. Let's continue this. Let's take those vows to become free for the benefit of all beings, so that we can help everyone become free. And it doesn't mean becoming a teacher necessarily, though some people will become Zen teachers, guides, which is what a Zen teacher is. Nothing special, simply someone who has been along the path a few steps ahead of the rest of us. But as we begin to liberate ourselves, our interactions with the world changes, with the phenomenal world. And that is felt and sensed and recognized in many ways. And that impacts others. Beyond that, in the absolute, when we let go, it vibrates out into all of life, enhancing peace for all beings. So, those of us who have chosen to do Zen practice, in a way, have a responsibility to continue it for the benefit of all beings. And we have everything we need to do that. And it's exciting to be in this sesshin and see how people are going deeper. and how harmonious we are in this wonderful Sangha family. So I thank you for listening. We'll stop now and recite the 4 vows.